Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the two bins that you see over here, these are the bins that I'd like to check in on today. These are European night crawlers. Well, this bin here is European night crawlers. It's a 36-day-old bin, and this bin over here is the castings that these night crawlers had been living in up until they'd all been moved into this container. I was treating their old environment, the castings that they were inhabiting previously, as being very rich with cocoons. So I launched this off as a cocoon nursery, so to speak. And it's been 10 days since I last checked in on these systems. I'm treating this as a 36-day-old bin, and this is a 26-day-old cocoon nursery. And after 26 days, you would think that a good number of cocoons that might have been in there might have been hatching by now, if not all of them. I'm not exactly sure what the time period is for a cocoon to hatch. But as far as red wigglers go, I always thought it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 21 to 24 days. But with night crawlers, it might be different. But my suspicion is that cocoons that might have been in that system probably don't need much longer to go before they all hatch out, hopefully resulting in a bunch of little tiny European night crawler worms that I'm going to want to try to bait out of this system eventually. So I'm going to get these two systems up onto the bench. This system here, though, when I fed it 10 days ago, I felt like I was feeding not only night crawlers, but mites. So many mites in that system. So today I'm including something to go along with the feeding, and that something is neem cake. This stuff right here, it's gonna go in with the food, and this stuff supposedly interferes with the reproductive cycle of mites. And by including this regularly in the feedings, hopefully it's going to knock out the mite population. And if the stuff works, we're going to know for sure, because that bin had tons of mites in it last time we checked. So let's get these bins up on the bench and get to work. So we're going to start here, and this is the one that I had referred to earlier as the cocoon nursery. And last time when I was in here 10 days ago to check on these two systems, I was still only contemplating the idea of placing food into that edge of the bin where you see only cardboard and bedding type stuff. But over time, I'm going to probably feel more and more compelled to actually set it up as a place that the worms would want to be attracted to go to get food and maybe even moisture, because in time, I want to maybe remove that plastic that was covering this side of the bin and begin letting the material dry out nicely. And by doing so, it's going to become a space that the worms don't really want to be in. So they'll start mobilizing and they'll start looking for a more hospitable place to be. And on this side, I will keep the plastic covering there to sort of force the recirculation of moisture that's present within the bin, so that there it'll remain and stay nice and damp and cozy for the worms, while this stuff out here has an opportunity to dry. Right away we're encountering a cocoon, which is apropos for our cocoon nursery, but you can see this is still intact. You can often find cocoons from which the worms have already emerged. They just look like, you know, a cracked egg. I believe, kind of squishy, no circular shape to them, just kind of a flattened out husk that remains of the cocoon. You might have noticed the outer perimeter was not very well covered. It was meant to allow for a little bit of drying, while at the same time the plastic over the center was meant to help recirculate moisture. I didn't want to prematurely dry out the contents of the bin until such a time that the material in the bin has had the chance for the worms to emerge. You know, very, very concerning somehow to me, the fact that I've got just so many mites in so many of my systems lately. And I'm kind of glad I've got that neem cake, because that stuff is supposed to be pretty effective. I tried neem oil, but I purchased the wrong type of neem oil. So for quite a while I was working on battling mites with material that ultimately was not going to even produce the desired result of reducing the number of mites. But it really makes me wonder if the mites could be actively preying on, baby worms. I mean, right here, it's pretty tiny. It's very hard to tell. But I do believe we've got ourselves a little baby worm right here. So tiny. And they start out, as you would imagine, since you saw the size of a, here's another one. Since you saw the size of the cocoon, it's probably no bigger than a peppercorn, if you know how big a peppercorn is. So if you try to imagine something crawling out of that thing, it's got to be pretty puny. And you saw adult worms in here too. So when I set this material aside, I really didn't go out of my way to try to pick every last mature worm out of this material. I left a few mature worms in here along with the cocoons. So once in a while we're going to see an adult worm in here too. But the purpose of this system is to try to give the cocoons in this system a chance to hatch, let the baby worms emerge, and then we'll try to round them up, and then we'll be able to treat this as a batch of finished compost. So before we do anything else, I'm not sure what else I'm going to really do in here other than stir the material up. I just want to kind of get some of the more dry stuff off the surface and submerge it and get some of the more damp stuff that's down low, bring it up, at the same time airing out the entire contents of the bin so that it can more easily dry and become a lot more crumbly, a lot more manageable. Every time I look into a bin and I see little tiny white specks, I also wonder if those might be mites too. I know that I use a white material, a white substance in my bins as grit for the worms. I use the crushed eggshell. So sometimes I wonder if the little white specks I'm seeing could just be white eggshell, or could they be those really slow-moving white mites? The material does feel like it's drying gradually and becoming a little bit more crumbly. It's the one thing I've kind of noticed in a lot of my bins, is that I've allowed things to get a little bit muddy and clumpy. But luckily, when the stuff dries out a bit, it becomes a lot more manageable and a lot more like you want your worm castings to be, a lot more granular and easy flowing. So here too, it's kind of cool. Every time I look around and I see a little baby worm, that's really what I was, striving for in this system. But I also look around and I see lots and lots of cocoons. That was a cocoon that I just dropped, but almost anywhere I look, I see cocoons. A lot of them are just sort of, caked into the somewhat overly damp material that's surrounding it. And that just tells me that we're, still gonna have to wait a little bit longer in here before all these cocoons hatch out, and we've got, just a bunch of baby worms that we want to try to encourage them to leave the material. So I gotta stop letting myself get distracted. Every time I see a cocoon, I kind of want to reach for it and check it out. But I mean, that's the whole idea of this bin, right? It's a cocoon nursery. Soon it won't be any cocoons in here. It'll just be a bunch of baby worms. So it'll be a baby nightcrawler nursery. But we've managed to agitate most of the material and air it out a little bit, even crumble up some of the stuff that's clumped together. And, over time it'll get better and better. And I had actually contemplated placing some food into here. And at the same time putting in some neem cake as well. Since I am seeing a good number of mites in here, I do feel like it would be a good thing to do. We're starting to see baby worms emerge, and they might be able to continue to find, food out here within the finished castings. But in time, I'd really like for them to eventually find that this stuff here is becoming too dry and that they want to leave. And as they make their way over to this side, they're going to find food and moisture and everything else that's going to make them feel a lot more comfortable and at home. So for now, I think this looks pretty good, but I am going to grab a couple items and drop them into here just so we've actually got some bait lined up for these worms, something to begin luring them over. And at the same time, I guess we can be considering this as a place that we're trying to lure the mites over into as well. And then hopefully the mites are going to encounter the neem cake, which should hopefully start driving their numbers down over time. At least that's what I'm hoping for. This is kind of a good sign, right? When the stuff doesn't stick to your glove, it's kind of an indicator that it's maybe drying out to the right degree that you want. So I brought down a number of different things that I could use to set up a little bit of a feeding area down in here. I'm going to pull out some of this stuff so I've got something to cover up with in the end. So we'll drop in. Let's use a nice tempting morsel like a banana peel. And we could just drop in a couple other odds and ends that are in here. I don't want to use up all this stuff because I bought this down here for the other bin that I want to feed. Let's put in a little bit of coffee too. The stuff does seem a little bit dry, so let's put in a little moisture here too. Got my squirt bottle. I'm going to try to dampen what we just checked out over there. I mean, it's got a little bit of moisture to it, but perhaps not quite enough. So I'm going to add some moisture, but the frozen veggies we just added should also help increase the moisture level in there too. But all this cardboard we're putting on here too, I'm going to give that stuff a little spray down. And then before we cover up, I'm going to start dropping in some of this neem cake. And I remember people mentioning how this stuff has kind of a pungent odor, and it does. It certainly does. When I first came down here a little while ago, I kind of passed by another system that I placed some of this stuff into yesterday, and it kind of made me do a little bit of a double take because I didn't know what it was that I was smelling. And then it kind of registered that it was the neem cake. A little bit stinky, but luckily not dreadfully so. I'm going to use my squirt bottle to try to rinse off some of the neem cake that landed on the side of the container. Get it down into the feeding area, which is where I want it. I'm also going to provide some crushed eggshell, which if we've got some baby worms cruising over here, something that they're going to be on the lookout for, a little bit of grit to help them eat any foods that they might want to try to consume. So that's there for the babies. Well, it's there for all the worms. So that looks pretty cool. It's kind of what I was after. We're just going to go ahead and begin covering things up here again. This piece of paper is getting a little bit tattered. This little worm kind of got stuck over here. Oh, okay, this is 2 sheets of paper, that's why. I could see the worm was kind of passing through the paper, but then I couldn't see, oh, that's why it's 2 sheets right here. Couldn't see where the other end of the worm was, so I think the more damp end of it is over on this side. That's the side that we're going to pay a little bit more attention to make sure that it is thoroughly covered so as not to let the moisture evaporate out of that side. But over on this side, I think we've still got a little bit of more drying to go before the material reaches optimum consistency so that it flows nicely and is nice and loose and flaky. So I'm going to put the plastic back on over this piece of paper in such a way that it looks kind of the way we found it, where it's not going all the way out to the edges of the bin. It's allowing for some evaporation around the sides. Okay. Well, let's just make sure we've got good coverage though over the feeding area. So this is I guess the initiation of the attempt at migrating worms out of this material as it continues to dry, as we continue to allow for the last of the cocoons to hatch. Okay, let's go ahead and get the ENC bin out here and feed those worms. All right. Now here, you're going to notice that there's no coverings. I came in here yesterday and there were a couple pieces of paper covering things, and it seemed like little flying insects had gone berserk, kind of nesting in here. So I left the coverings off. In fact, I even placed this bin outside for a short while to try to let the insects maybe leave the system, although my guess is that they're probably still in here in great numbers. So whatever, that's part of the reason we're in here, to, you know, not only feed the worms but also try to take measures to battle the mite population that has kind of moved in here, as well as the other insects that have kind of moved into here. Last time I came into this system and went down into where I had last fed, I felt like I was looking at sort of a mite explosion, and I expect to see more of the same today. And I got a lot of little gnats or flying insects, whatever they are, buzzing around here too. It's my understanding that the neem cake actually helps with them too. I sure hope it does, because I've really got sort of a infestation going on here between the mites and the flying insects. I'm really hoping that the neem is going to help. So let's just start peeling back what was placed in here last time as the feeding. I'm trying to remember what it was. I believe I did make the extra effort to try to place only those types of foods into here that I thought would be not so interesting to the mites. So I tried to use veggies rather than fruits. And I can see that some of the stuff is getting consumed. There's also a fair bit of leftovers in here as well. Material in here is a little dry too around the feeding area. I must have used leaves down in there to serve as bedding to go with the food. So we're just going to kind of crack open a space over here to put today's feeding in. And hopefully the neem cake starts doing the job that I'm hoping that it does. I guess I'll take some of this more dry, leafy stuff off the surface here and plop it down into the hole, kind of a foundation for today's feeding. These are all chunks of the previous feeding. I guess this is the stuff that I'm expecting the worms and the mites to be after. And since it's the mites that I'm trying to affect with the neem cake, I want to make sure that I kind of coat all the food items with this stuff. So after we add the new food, we'll put a little bit more in, but I'd like to treat some of this existing food with this neem cake. And you know, I've never used this stuff before, so if anyone out there has any experience with this and has any input into the manner in which I'm applying it, am I using too much, am I using not enough, whatever the case may be, I'm open to suggestions and input. So I've got a couple of used coffee filters. Always a good idea to include bedding. So that's the whole idea behind the paper. Let's see if we we can get this stuff out of here. It's been a little while since I removed this from the freezer, so it's beginning to thaw and it's sticking to the container, but we're going to see if we can get the better part of it out of here and into the worm bin. All right, I think we got the majority of it. We're going to put this mango seed right in the middle. Here's some banana peel. Let's put a little bit on the other side as well. Kind of spread it around. Throw some of these veggies on this side. So we'll give these guys some grit too, but like I said, we're going to make sure we provide a generous amount of neem cake to go with the foods that we're adding. So here, if you're wanting to approach that freshly added food, you're going to have to go right through that stuff, right? You can't get to the food unless you pass through the layer of neem cake that I scattered across the top. And I don't know about the coffee being very interesting to the mites. I think the mites are probably a little bit more interested in the more sweet kinds of stuff that's down low, the banana peels, the mango seeds, stuff like that. So it is kind of my hope that in their effort to get down to those sweeter morsels, they'll happen upon the neem cake, and the neem cake will do its job for us. So let's hope that that's what happens in here. It's a good amount of dry material in here, but if you work your way down low, you do encounter nice damp stuff where the worms seem to be doing a-okay. I believe it is probably a good idea to cover back up with plastic. I'm wondering if it might have just been the paper that was becoming a spot that the flying insects were really enjoying. They were all over the paper coverings. So my hope is that I can get plastic covers back on here to keep the moisture within the system. But I want to cover up in such a way that I don't continue to create a haven for the flying insects. So we're going to try putting plastic coverings over without any paper coverings. And at some point I'd really love to be done with all of these stinking flying insects. Ugh. I mean, the mites are annoying, but at least they stay in the bin for the most part. The flying insects, ugh. I just can't seem to resist swatting at them when I see them. So I've got a plastic bag we can cover up with, but I feel like I just want to sprinkle a little bit more of this stuff across the top. Again, I really am a total novice when it comes to using this stuff. But since the worms like it, from what I understand, I'm not too worried about being generous about applying it. And if it does what it's meant to do, which is eliminate the mites, then I'll be keeping it around as a staple item to include in my bins in the future. So hopefully a good plastic covering will sort of force the recirculation of moisture in here and help dampen some of the more dry materials that are in here. That's what I'm hoping for. And then that'll just make the entire contents of the bin a lot more hospitable for the worms to want to cruise around in. So I really hope this neem experiment works. Keeping my fingers crossed, but I should also probably be thinking of a plan B to deal with these flying insects, because if it doesn't work, I need to get rid of them somehow. All right, everyone. We've got a few things I need to clean up and put away here, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.